Hi, my name is Emily McDonald, and to paraphrase the introduction of the book I'm presenting on today, I'd like to say that the life of Arthur Less isn't so bad. As we analyze the different aspects of Andrew Sean Greer's novel Less, I hope that you'll be able to understand why this particular book managed to captivate audiences all around the world, myself included. Before we dive into the life of Arthur Less, it might help to know a little more about me. I am absolutely a heavy reader and writer. Although I write music more than essays, I still consider this a beautiful format to express creativity. I stay connected to music by traveling around the country with a competing indoor marching percussion group. This group falls under an organization called WGI, or Winter Guard International. I have been accepted into the University of Louisiana at Monroe for the upcoming fall semester, where I plan to study pharmacology. I'm a regular volunteer with several local organizations, which helps me maintain my quest for constant self-improvement, just like Arthur Less did in this novel. I firmly believe that with hard work and optimism, happiness can and will come around eventually. Arthur Less, however, struggles a bit more with the concept of happiness in the beginning of this novel. The book opens from the perspective of an unidentified narrator who tells readers about the seemingly average man whose life we follow throughout the book. Arthur is a struggling writer living in San Francisco, currently in the home he used to share with his former fiancé, Robert. On a seemingly average day, he receives an invitation to another ex's wedding, a man named Freddie Pellew. This invitation seems like the most cruel form of cosmically planned humor at the time in Less's mind. Instead of responding in a normal or calm or rational way, Arthur decides to run away at full speed from the thought of his lost love. In a matter of days, Less books 7 different plane tickets, first to New York, and then to Mexico, then to Italy, Germany, France, Morocco, India, and finally to Japan. This is our first indication that Arthur Less is going through an astounding midlife crisis. Throughout his various trips, Less follows patterns very similar to that of the stages of grief. After what seems like an eternity of denial and angst, he does eventually reach some level of acceptance for himself and his love life. The author of Less used inspiration from his own life experiences to create the mold for Arthur. Born in 1970, Andrew Sean Greer was only a few younger than his esteemed protagonist at the time he wrote his 5th novel. He currently lives in San Francisco with his partner, David Ross. His writing career started during his time at Brown University, and then it took off when he graduated from the University of Montana, and he started writing short stories for publications such as The New Yorker, Esquire, and the Paris Review. He also taught small writing classes at several universities, including his semester-long seminar in Berlin, which consequently inspired the 4th chapter of this book, titled Less Germany, where Arthur also taught a class on creative writing. Greer seems to base Arthur Less off a possible future version of himself, if he never found the levels of success he eventually reached following the publication of this novel. In one interview with PBS, Greer discusses how writing is a job that must be done every single day of one's life, even if the circumstances aren't ideal. The primary difference between Andrew Sean Greer and Arthur Less is that Greer didn't let any obstacle stop him from writing. One of the primary difficulties that distracted Less from his career surrounded his relationships. Because he was born in the 1950s, Arthur Less is in his early 20s when the HIV and AIDS epidemic hits the US. As a gay man, this complicates many aspects of his life. Gay men lived in fear of AIDS as many of their friends and partners fell ill and died after catching the disease. Living through an event reminiscent of a targeted plague for the LGBT population undoubtedly contributed to Arthur's fears and insecurities. According to a study done by the National Association of Social Workers, more than half of all surveyed survivors of the AIDS epidemic reported feeling higher levels of anxiety and lower levels of self-satisfaction as a result of fear targeted towards catching HIV or AIDS from a partner. This source can be found listed as The Psychosocial Impact of HIV and AIDS on the Lives of Gay Men under my collection of works cited. The chances that Arthur suffers from anxieties as a result of the epidemic are extremely high, and his insecure behaviors throughout the novel indicate that an underlying psychological impact from his youth could certainly be a factor in his impulsive decision-making and detachment from lasting relationships. Arthur's crisis fuels the plot of the entire novel. He is described as mediocre in not only his career, but also his appearance and his behaviors. While audiences may not admire this about him, it does make Les a very easy character to relate to. Younger audiences might relate to his immaturity and uncertainty of the world around him, while older audiences can laugh at his chaotic state of crisis, while also sympathizing with it. According to one journalist who read the book, writers blush in the mirror the book holds up to them, especially when it comes to defining oneself by the nature of their work. Arthur's inability to move past these insecurities demonstrates immaturity. He is constantly stuck in the past, contemplating his youth. Unfortunately, Les spends most of his time preoccupied with his lack of exceptional traits, or his mediocrity, instead of trying to accept himself for the perfectly average and admittedly lovable man he is. Les's average traits feed the primary theme of the book, which is quite clearly the challenges surrounding mediocrity, especially when it comes to self-acceptance. Arthur is a white man in his late 40s, and eventually his early 50s by the end of the book, and resembles what Andrew Sean Greer describes as amazingly mundane. Arthur Les only has one major success to note so far, which is a short story titled Calypso. It's a retelling of the Odyssey, originally written by Homer. Les puts his own spin on the story by making Calypso a man instead of a woman. This was intended to create more drama and intrigue. Instead, however, his friends and colleagues say the book just wasn't quite interesting enough. After his one true success is deemed a personal failure, Les describes himself as an author that is too old to be fresh and too young to be rediscovered. All of his colleagues and lovers are, in contrast, wildly successful. This series of events exemplifies his feelings of mediocrity, because he is not nearly as ahead of the intellectual curve as these talented men and women are. The book itself is quite modern. It takes place in the late 2000s and was published online in 2017. The portrayal of being unremarkable as great, unconquerable struggle seems like a very common phenomenon, especially with younger generations. The pressure to make everything bigger and better and more extravagant is especially big today, with fast-paced work and school environments. Greer also takes the time to address a few issues in the modern LGBT community. These involve insecurities and mental health issues. He sets a healthy example by showing Arthur taking on his obstacles and finding new ways to cope with them in the final chapter of his story. Although the angst seems more glaringly obvious, the healthy resolution in the final chapter is still there. Overall, the language in this book is beautiful. Greer does an amazing job at painting the scenery in a beautiful light regardless of Arthur's chaotic view of the world. Some of my interpretations of mediocrity differed from the people around me who also chose to read the book, but I managed to take into account the countless perspectives we found regarding Arthur's growth. I personally enjoyed the adventure and the evolution of the characters, but the absolute resolution left room for all of that progress to vanish once again. With possibility for romance with Freddie back in Arthur's life in the final chapter, it could now be incredibly easy for angst to take over once again. Other than this relatively small detail, I found Les's journey to be wholly satisfying. Andrew Sean Greer did a wonderful job at portraying the benefits of finding peace within yourself and overcoming adversity, even if it is relatively unimportant in comparison to larger crises at hand. And with this, we have completed The Journey of Less, written by Andrew Sean Greer. I appreciate you following Arthur's story with me, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for your time.